Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Join the Navy, they say. Explore the galaxy. Discover new exotic flora and fauna and eat said exotic flora and fauna for science. Then explore new cultures. Fornicate with new species. Contract newly discovered sexually transmitted diseases. All also for science. Rinse and repeat, and in all honesty, it probably gets kind of tiring after a while. You know, all that living on the edges of civilized space, exploring and discovering so much crazy stuff, and spending twice as much time recovering the bacta tanks from all that discovering. You dirty dog, you. Well, if joining the Navy still sounds appealing after that whole little spiel, well, might I recommend you take a look at the list of vessels we're going to be providing for you today that you should totally avoid, because some of these starships, statistically speaking, are deadly to serve on. You're almost better off fighting in the infantry than serving on some of these vessels. Today we'll be taking a look at some of the most dangerous ships you can crew. You know, as you get older, you start to realize that just pushing through it isn't exactly a healthcare plan, especially if you have other people depending on you, like those Jedi younglings that you're totally not going to turn into the Empire for what, you know, realistically is a life-changing sum of money. But yeah, anyway, those annual checkups you've been holding off in the last 3 years, not a great idea. Staying on top of your health is one of the most important things you can do, not just to feel better now, but to prevent bigger issues down the road. And while finding a good doctor used to feel overwhelming, it really doesn't have to be anymore. And that's where today's video sponsor, ZocDoc, comes in. It's a free website that works like a search engine for trusted, high-quality doctors and specialists. They have some really great search tools. You can filter by the type of care you need, your insurance provider, location, and even availability, so you're not waiting weeks for help. With ZocDoc, you can click to instantly book an appointment and get access to more than 100,000 healthcare providers across nearly every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care, skin care, etc. I've actually used ZocDoc many times over the years to book specialists in my area, and I really love the fact that you have reviews and ratings for all the doctors, so you know what kind of service provider you're dealing with. Plus, as someone who really just doesn't have any time to do, bureaucracy, I like how their online portal allows you to fill out your initial paperwork online, so you don't have to do it while you're waiting in the office. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. You don't even have to talk to anyone, just book with a few clicks. So stop putting off those doctor appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/GenerationTech. Also, link in the description down below to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thanks again to ZocDoc for sponsoring us. Let's get back to the video. If you think serving in the Rebel Alliance is dangerous, well, try serving in the Resistance. That'll get you killed even quicker. During the hasty evacuation of Dakar, the Resistance fleet found themselves in the crosshairs of a Manticore IV class siege Dreadnought, with very few heavy weapons at their disposal, capable of making a dent in an almost 8-kilometer long vessel. And so, Captain Poe Dameron of the Resistance leads a desperate all-out attack against the First Order in a delaying action. And carrying the strike package for this desperate ploy was a squadron of MG-100 StarFortress heavy bombers. Designed by Slane and Corporal, who are known for their vertical cockpit layouts, the MG-100 was designed as a late Galactic Civil War heavy bomber for the New Republic. And during the New Republic's demilitarization period that followed the end of the Galactic Civil War, a lot of these MG-100 Starfortresses basically were scrapped or salvaged. Many were also recommissioned and assigned to civic duties for firefighting, search and rescue, stuff like that. And they probably should have stayed off of the battlefield because the MG-100 had all of the wrong attributes to make a good bombing platform. It did hold a lot of munitions, over 1,000 proton bombs, enough to do some serious damage to most capital ships, and that was probably its only winning attribute, because most of those munitions were dumb, or at least guided by magnets, which means that there's no real propulsion on any of these weapons, and so the MG-100 had to really get close to its targets in order to release its payload. That's the trade-off, and I guess it made sense for the New Republic because when it commissioned this ship design, it was looking for something very niche. What the New Republic wanted was essentially a cheap container for a ton of bombs. At the end of the Galactic Civil War, it wasn't uncommon for Rebel fleets to obtain tactical superiority over Imperial-class Star Destroyers by eliminating all weapons emplacements and any enemy escort ships they had. But even after eliminating an ISD's ability to fight back, a lot of these fleets just didn't have enough firepower to actually take the ship's hull out. The New Republic fleet still lacked heavy hitters. It lacked the type of vessel you needed to destroy a Star Destroyer. And so the MG-100 StarFortress was basically the cheapest and quickest way to solve that problem. Not to be controversial or anything like that, but the MG-100 isn't really all that different from a bunch of Terrys loading up a bunch of explosives onto a box truck and then sending it at a checkpoint. It's basically the same concept. And so you can imagine crewing a MG-100 StarFortress was horrific. Not quite as bad as driving a bomb truck. I mean, there is some potential for surviving in this scenario, but it's probably just as terrifying, if not more terrifying, than being in a bomber crew during World War II over Germany. Believe it or not, being a bomber crew member was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire U.S. military. More than 25% of all U.S. combat deaths in the European theater were bomber crews, and before the Allies had complete air superiority over Germany, a bomber crew had only 1 in 3 chance of surviving all 25 mission tours. By any standard, those are terrible odds. The Gallifrey GR-75 looks like a little armadillo, perfect for securing and protecting whatever cargo you're hiding beneath the hull. But the truth is, the GR-75 is just a simple bulk freighter. The hull is paper-thin Durasteel, barely enough to prevent decompression. It's a simple and elegant aesthetic design designed to basically hide all of those ugly cargo pods and containers beneath the hull of the ship. Most freighter designs like this are all about cutting corners, limited crew, limited life support, limited shields and weapons, and that's because the cargo and freight transport industry is very difficult. The margins are extremely thin, especially when you're running a smaller ship like the GR-75. I mean, these guys have to compete with a Lucrehulk freighter, which is just not fair. And so the GR-75 was a piss-poor vehicle to take into combat, even if it did look well protected. Other than some aftermarket shields and some light point defense cannons, this is basically the equivalent of taking a Sprinter van and, trying to bring supplies to the front lines of a modern battlefield, which is just teeming with, drones with explosives. The survivability of a GR-75 crew when encountering combat situations is essentially nil, which is why ideally they only operate in the rear as a part of the Rebels' logistical network. But since the front lines of the Galactic Civil War were always rapidly moving, the GR-75 often found itself in the middle of combat operations or being interdicted by Imperial patrols. During a mercy mission on the planet of Terralov, a GR-75 escorted by a squadron of A-Wings encountered the dreaded TIE Interceptor. It's actually one of the first known engagements between Rebel forces and this specific model of TIE fighters, and let's just say the GR-75 was taken out with relative ease. The Imperials didn't even need to use heavy weapons, just the blaster cannons on their TIEs were enough. The GR-75 was also commonly used to evacuate Rebel bases. During the Battle of Atollon, several GR-75s were taken out by the Imperial blockade, more were destroyed during the Rebel retreat on Scarif, and during the Battle of Hoth, several were blasted into pieces while trying to flee. Being in the Rebel Navy is really a crapshoot. I mean, it's all about the imbalance between the Rebellion and the Empire. But at least with larger vessels or more capable platforms, you stand a better chance at survival. With the Gallifrey GR-75, you're essentially a sitting duck. It's just not a very good platform. And not only do you have very limited offenses and defenses on this ship, the Gallifrey GR-75 was notoriously slow at sublight speeds as well, and was only rated to have a pretty poor Class 4 hyperdrive. The Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser is as antiquated in its design and form as its developer Rendeli Star Drive. Both vessels and makers probably reached their peak during the Old Republic era, a time period where ships were covered in thick hull plating bristling with turbolasers, and navies lined up in orderly fashion and exchanged massive broadsides of turbolaser fire at each other at extremely close ranges. Losses were expected in every battle, and honestly, the life of an individual sailor was pretty grim and also expendable. After Ruusan Reformation, large-scale military conflict more or less vanished from the galaxy. Starship designs started reflecting the more elegant and civilized nature of the galaxy. If you take a look at the High Republic-era Jedi starships, they look quite fragile, but aesthetically are very interesting and refined. The Dreadnought Heavy Cruiser is essentially the opposite of that. It is the Chrysler 300 of starships. It's boxy, bulky, and has the handling of a giant boat. It's a hammer-like tool during a period of time where diplomacy is the preferred way to settle a dispute, and as such, it was quite antiquated by the late Republic era. Now, there was an attempt to modernize the Dreadnaught heavy cruiser. The 600-meter-long vessel had a crew of over 16,000, making it extremely manpower intensive. During the Republic era, the Senate sponsored the creation of the Katana fleet. Engineers managed to slave the hyperdrive of 200 Dreadnought-class cruisers to each other, greatly decreasing the amount of sailors needed to crew the ship to just 2,200. But on the ship's maiden voyage, some of the crew members caught something known as the High virus at a port of call. This is an extremely dangerous and very contagious virus that basically made a person mad until they killed themselves or everyone around them. Somehow, the surviving crew members who still hadn't turned insane managed to slave all the ships together in the Katana fleet and send it into hyperspace. It's highly likely that the rest of the crew would perish shortly after, and it's just unknown where exactly this thing went. No one really has coordinates on it. The location of this lost fleet was the subject of many legends and ghost stories for spacers throughout the next century. Several business folks and even the Rebel Alliance tried to recover the Katana fleet and use these ships for their own purpose. For everyone else, if you're smart, you're gonna avoid the Dreadnought-class cruiser like a plague, because not only was it antiquated in design, it was probably one of the most cursed ship classes in Republic history. And we haven't even mentioned the fate of Outbound Flight, whose entire crew also disappeared from historical records. The Emperor likes to bully people. They bullied the people on Jeddah, they bullied the people on Gorman, Aldhani, Alderaan. Basically, everywhere they went, they acted like a big bully. And while yes, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer is mighty, and the Empire's many fortress worlds were formidable, the Empire was massive, and it had many soft spots that weren't nearly as well protected. And as descent grows in the galaxy, it's these softer areas that come under attack. Mainly outposts and transit centers in the Outer Rim, where population centers were much smaller and spread out. Out here, the Empire wasn't represented by massive mile-long capital ships. Instead, it was the Gozanti-class cruiser that held the line. This was a small commercial freighter by Corellian Engineering Corporation, converted for military use. It could be up-armored to have additional weapons. There was even an engine upgrade package available. But yeah, basically, the Empire was at parity with smugglers and pirates in the Outer Rim, who often also used the Gozanti-class cruiser as well for their missions. Interesting thing is, a lot of the most competent Imperial officers all started their career on the Gozanti-class cruiser. Because you had to be smart and resourceful in order to stay ahead of your enemies on that thing. I mean, Grand Admiral Thrawn famously spent his earlier years as an Imperial officer on this exact model of ship. But ultimately, the Gozanti-class cruiser was way out of depth, especially when it countered the regular Rebel Navy. I mean, even Rebel snubfighters equipped with heavy munitions could make quick work of the Gozanti-class cruiser, as could the Rebellion's own fleet of blockade runners. Ultimately, being on a Gozanti-class cruiser paints a pretty large target on your back, but here's the thing. The Gozanti-class cruiser is nowhere near as survivable as some of the other terror weapons employed by the Empire. In its most basic form, a gravity well generator is essentially a tractor beam, terrific for law enforcement or any type of interdiction mission where you're trying to capture or prevent ships from escaping. Now, a gravity well generator on an interdictor ship goes to the next level. It generates a large mass shadow that mimics a star or planetary body, which in turn triggers a failsafe found on all hyperdrives, which reverts the ship back to real space. In practice, this traps all ships in the area in subspace. You can't enter hyperspace. If you're in it, you will be pulled out in the most unceremonious and jarring way. Now, in most cases, an Imperial Interdictor cruiser or Star Destroyer is going to be accompanied by an escort fleet of some kind, and that is because gravity well generators are energy intensive. Therefore, there's not much power left for other systems like defense, shields, and weapons emplacements. Left alone, the Interdictor is quite vulnerable to even the lightest attacks, and even an escort fleet can't really protect you, as seen during the Battle of Atollon, where Thrawn loses both of his Interdictors to a much smaller and inferior Rebel fleet. One of the Interdictors he loses because of insubordination from his underling, Admiral Constantine, and the other one was destroyed by a Mandalorian boarding team. Either way, surfing on one of these ships is not a good idea because enemies will always target the biggest threat that faces them. And since the Interdictor specializes in grabbing hold of enemy ships, it becomes the most dangerous vessel in every engagement it takes part in. Sometimes the Interdictor might even pull something out of hyperspace that is just too large and too heavily armed for it to handle. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer is the pride of the Imperial Navy. Designed to strike terror into the hearts of the Empire's enemies, this was a psychological weapon as much as it was a strategic asset. The ISD at its core was a battleship, equipped with an excessive amount of turbo lasers. This ship was designed to slug it out with enemy capital ships or provide fire support for ground pounders or the onboard contingent of stormtroopers. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer also had a prefab base on board that could be deployed quickly to support ground units. There was also a large motor pool to support the legion of stormtroopers on board, and you can also find all of the communication tools necessary to serve as a command center for a larger force. This is essentially a mobile and heavily armored and armed forward operating base that can be deployed anywhere in the galaxy in a relatively short time. Or at least that's how it worked when the Empire was functional. Once Emperor Palpatine died after Endor, the linchpin that held the Empire together fell apart, and the first thing to go was the logistics network that supplied the Imperial Navy. Suddenly, the focus on the Imperial-class Star Destroyer's firepower went to just, how many resources the ship took up. In good times, an Imperial-class Star Destroyer could be refit, repaired, and redeployed in short order at large docks like Quat or Fondor, but now any major damage to one of these ship's systems was going to be hanging around for a long time. Resources were suddenly finite, replacement parts non-existent. And what you have within a few years is a fleet of Star Destroyers that honestly look a lot more like Thrawn's Chimera in Exile, with a busted up hull missing a lot of plating, maybe some ad hoc repairs visible on the surface. Also, skilled officers and pilots become harder and harder to find at the end of the war. The smart ones had already defected, and the skilled ones had already been sacrificed on the front lines. What you have left are very meek individuals who have no courage, and also hard-lined fanatic individuals. You don't want either group manning the bridge on your vessel. What used to be the pride of the Imperial Navy, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, was now being hunted down by rebel hunter and killer patrols made up of blockade runners, Mon Calamari cruisers, and the new Starhawk-class battleship, specifically designed to counter the Empire. Also, those pesky rebel snuff fighters were still out in force, too small to hit with a turbo laser, but extremely deadly and precise at taking out weapons emplacements. And so, serving in one of these Imperial-class Star Destroyers in the late Imperial era must have been demoralizing and just kind of sad. While crews are expected to operate their vessels in even the most catastrophic conditions, it's probably very difficult for these Imperial sailors to see this vessel, which has been their home for so many years, slowly deteriorate. Suddenly, parts of the ship that you used to be able to walk through are now sealed off because, one compartment got breached into vacuum, or maybe there's just not enough energy to provide life support for the entire ship. The situation is getting grim. One of the most common issues that the Imperial-class Star Destroyer faced was just running out of ammunition and being unable to crew all those weapons emplacements. The ISD already had a small complement of TIE fighters, and that grew even smaller as pilots became harder and harder to replace. Soon, even the reliable TIE fighter would face maintenance issues. Pilots and maintenance crews will be forced to cannibalize working TIE fighters in order to get enough fighters out to screen the vessel. Starfighters that used to be written off because of battle damage are now treated as very prized scrap that can be used for components. To make matters worse, if your Imperial-class Star Destroyer was led by a chaotic individual or just a individual with poor leadership skills, you're also going to be screwed. There's one thing more horrible than serving in the Imperial Navy, and that is serving under an Imperial warlord who really is just a bandit with military hardware. Overall, terrible ships to serve on post-Endor. And when the First Order inherits, dozens of Imperial-class Star Destroyers, what's the first thing they do? Well, they automate most of the systems and put droids inside of these ships so that it is much cheaper to operate. Well, guys, that is our list for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.